live intro yet. I don't have my little 30-second intro. So we're just kind of doing a hello, everybody. We're live, kind of having fun with this part where it's kind of casually transitioning in. Hello, everybody. My name is Ken Stearns. I'm the host of the JAR Foundation podcast live. And we're doing this as a kind of a result of my JAR podcast show where it's face-to-face. And I sit down with a guest and we have 444 questions about life in a big jar. And they reach in one by one and pull out these heavy questions and we share. They share their opinion about the question. First is the definition of what it means to them, how they interpret the question, and then, the answer about what that question means to them based on their own life experience. And I've been, 200 interviews, 60 cities across the US last year. Amazing people. At the same time, blown away by the struggles people have had, personal struggles, the mental health challenges, the journeys they've been through, and how a lot of them have done it by themselves for so long and managed to finally, and I think Chuck's story today is similar in that somewhere along the way, they find some help and they find out who they are. And, they're on that road to becoming a different person or a better version of themselves, probably is a better way to say it. So today, kind of really excited. We had interesting back check, a little back talk with Chuck, and I got that was kind of a wow moment there for me to hear your little surprise part of the journey. And we'll get to that later. But Chuck, welcome to the show. Thanks for being a guest. And how about a little bit about who you are and what you're doing today?
Yeah, well, thank you for inviting me to be part of this, Ken. I really appreciate sharing and talking to a lively conversationalist like yourself. So thank you. So my name is Chuck Hall. I work professionally as a business coach and a team dynamics consultant. I am coming up on my 40th year graduation from college. So I've been doing this for a long time. I have an undergraduate degree in journalism and a master's in organizational dynamics.
Okay.
I've also recently become a certified peer specialist for mental health. I've had my own business since 2007, married for almost 34 years to my wife, Amy. I have 3 adult children who are 32, 29, and 24. I currently live in Conyers, Georgia, which is east of Atlanta. But I spent most of my life living in Bucks County, Pennsylvania, which is north of Philadelphia. So
okay.
that's the quick overview of who I am and what I'm doing.
Grandfather yet, or is it's still to be determined?
No, we have grand dogs.
Okay.
So that's where we're at now. We've got 3 grand dogs, 2 boys and a girl.
I love doggies. I love doggies. Very interesting. So on the business side, how did you end up becoming a business coach? This is because these are really interesting roles to me.
Yeah. So it is kind of an interesting evolution. When I first got out of college, I was planning to be a Catholic priest. So I worked for a little while in lay ministry, spent a year in formation with an order of priests called the Paulist Fathers. And after a year, decided that wasn't my cup of tea. So I ended up working a little bit in social services, then got into corporate communications. And within corporate communications, nobody knows what they're doing when they're first out of college and trying to figure out their job. I kind of took kind of a counseling or advising role on different writing projects and working with business leaders on how to do it. I moved up into management, kind of crossed over a little bit into marketing, from marketing or communications to marketing communications to marketing leadership. And as I moved up and got more experience, I kind of became an internal consultant to senior leaders on communications, on business strategies, on dealing with employee issues, and all manner of things. So when I was finally ready to start my own business, consulting and coaching seemed to be a really good path for me, and it's been a great fit.
That's really interesting. I'm thinking of, my experience in corporate and the role of the communications team, even way different from the marketing team, but that communication sits on top of the whole. I mean, everything comes through you. If it's well positioned in the company, you do start to say, hey, this message, what you're saying over here doesn't line up with what they're marketing or this product positioning. I could see where this does lead to, you
Yes.
really do have this idea of how to stitch stuff together and start coaching people saying, hey, why is that message not aligned with this message? And if you figure that out as a good executive, yeah, you're going to be a coach.
Yeah, and Ken, that's a
Huh.
great observation. My not the highest paid, but the best job that I ever had in the corporate world was I was overall head of communications for a company that no longer exists. It got purchased, called Provident Mutual Life Insurance Company, and I started
Okay.
there as the head of marketing communications. Then they added PR. Then they started to add like internet content,
Okay.
then some employee communications, crisis communications, M&A communications, strategic events. And, my friends in the company at one point teased me that, yeah, we just got a memo from Bob, who was our CEO. And it says, anytime we want to use words, we've got to consult you first. Right. And so it was good natured ribbing. But, the fact of the matter was that we
Uh,
had really good integrated communications throughout the company. And
yes.
by working with leaders of different divisions of the company, trying to get those messages trued up so that,
Yeah.
everything was going in the right direction. And, when you talk about crisis communications, M&A communications, all of that's very tricky. And we'd have leaders who'd want to say one thing, and a lawyer, I'd go to him and he would say, holy cow, they can't say that. That's not even accurate.
Uh,
Right. So it was a great role. They valued me there. And I really found it to be very gratifying to be able to pull all that together.
yeah, yeah. So that's funny. I was also, my reference to that. My comment was, I was an insurance guy for
Mm-hmm.
35 years. So funny that you're an insurance company, and so I
Yeah.
immediately was thinking of what it's like for my insurance comms people. The
Mm-hmm.
role that they played and how they were literally pretty junior people, but they sat with the CEO, they sat with legal, they went into marketing, the marketing person, they went to the product person.
Mm-hmm.
They were juniorish, but they sat at the highest tables
Mm-hmm.
because they needed to get the words from that person, what they were meant to say, how they wanted to say it, and then go back and come back and kind of help you understand how to say it correctly, so it lined up.
Yes. Yes. And I will add that by different things that I wrote before they were released, when they were under review by like the executive vice presidents of the company, from a negative point of view, I would say I catalyzed many arguments. Um,
Yes, yeah,
from
absolutely, you
a
would.
positive point of view, I catalyzed many really good business decisions because they didn't really know what they were agreeing to until they saw it in writing.
And articulated in the right way.
Yeah, yeah. So when they
Yeah.
would see what I wrote, then they would have a discussion about like, are we really going to do this way? Is this what we're really thinking?
Well, and sometimes because there's meetings happen, you miss a meeting, you miss 2 meetings, you don't read the memo, and you come back to the room and the pitch has changed slightly, the positioning's changed slightly, and you
Hmm.
find out, "Oh, is that how we're gonna position this new product? Oh." Or
Yes.
you probably also uncover misalignment. I think the most important role would be helping to uncover misalignment
Hmm.
within the company, within the teams, to make sure that when you do launch or when you do have a crisis or a merger, that everybody's always on the same page at the end.
Yeah. I mean, that was the goal. It didn't always happen, but yeah, I think I ought to start writing at least a series of blog posts about some of the funny experiences that happened.
Absolutely.
Working in that role.
Yeah, absolutely. So how did you end up on the kind of the mental health journey? How have you ended up in a place where, because those are crazy roles.
Yeah.
Those are high pressure roles. You end up you end up really as a counselor,
Hmm.
a business counselor in a way. So coaching is not just business coaching, but there's a lot of human touch.
Yeah. Well, so the mental health journey, as a coach, I was always tried to be really in tune with mental health. When I worked in social services, I worked with abused and neglected teenagers and was what was called a residential counselor. I didn't live there, but the kids did. And so I'd
Hmm.
go in for like a 10 or 12-hour shift, work with them, kind of teach them life skills, give them an adult to talk to, kind of help ground them. And they had
Hmm.
social workers and therapists and doctors and everybody working with them, but I was just basically, be a decent human being to these kids and help them develop some life skills, figure out how to get along with each other, just basically keep them living. And so I did that. Fast forward to October of 2020, and this is
Okay.
really inflection point for me. Was I almost died, so I was feeling really bad health wise. I hadn't had any form of health care in more than 20 years because I could not function in any type of healthcare setting. So this may sound absurd, but it was incredibly logical to me at the time. I was feeling so bad. I was visiting my mother in Pennsylvania. I was really short of breath. I was feeling exhausted. I had tightness in my chest. And so I went on Amazon and I bought a device to do my own EKG. So I did my EKG, and it said that I had a normal rhythm, but I had tachycardia. My pulse rate was 120 resting. So then I Googled what could cause tachycardia, and the number one reason was high blood pressure. So I went back on
Okay.
Amazon and I ordered a blood
Got
pressure
got
machine. And so that came the next day. I was able to get it overnight. And when I plugged it in, it said, I think it was 199 over 149, and it was flashing hypertensive crisis. So I Googled hypertensive crisis, and it said you should go to the hospital immediately. I called my sister, who's a retired nurse, and she said, you definitely need to go to the hospital.
Yeah. I could have
Um,
told you what she would have told you.
yeah,
Yeah.
why don't you call 911? I'm like, no, I'm not going to call
Yes.
911. I'm at my mother's house. She was in her 80s at the time. And my daughter was there. I said, I'll just get Jill to drive me to the hospital. So Jill drove me to the hospital, and, there was my blood pressure way out of control. And so anyway, I was admitted to the hospital. I was in for 4 days. They got me stabilized. But one of the things that I knew, I had read some books and things, and I felt I had what was described as medical phobia. And I found some stuff on the internet, and I just couldn't handle being in a medical environment. Over time, it became harder and harder. And for a
Wow.
while, I could be, with somebody. My wife had 2 rounds of cancer surgery in 2016 and 17, full recovery. She's in, great health now.
Okay.
But it was all I could do to stand being in the hospital with her. I mean, it took every ounce of my being to persevere to be there. But the thought of me getting any care, that was impossible. So when I got out of the hospital, I followed up. Oh, while I was in the hospital, I told everybody who I came in contact with, I have a really hard time being here. I think I have medical phobia. So, I got different reactions from doctors and nurses. One of the funniest was, I'm laying in ICU, hooked up to monitors with 2 IVs in me, and a new cardiology fellow came in, hadn't seen him before. And I told him, and he goes, "Oh, are you experiencing anxiety?" And I said, "Yes, extreme anxiety." And he
Yeah.
goes, "Oh, you should try yoga." Right. And so the thought that went through my head was, well, if you unhook these things and get me a mat, I'm happy to give it a try. but right now I don't think I can do
Yeah.
yoga, right? But I didn't say that to him. But
You
I
should try
found
yoga.
found one young ICU nurse overnight. When I told her, she asked a magical question, and she said, "What's that like for you?" And so she asked me to describe my traumatic experiences with healthcare. And she was very empathetic, very understanding. Obviously took good physical care of me because I was
Yeah.
able to recover and get out. But when I got out of the hospital, it was during the pandemic. I jumped on telemedicine, found a therapist. First went with him. He said, "There's nothing wrong with you. You just need to be stronger. You're just afraid of going to the doctor. Just make appointments and go." And I said, "I haven't been able to go to the doctor in 20 years, and it almost killed me. That
Yeah.
seems a little extreme." And he goes, "Well, it is, but the answer is the same. Here's a link to a book. Read this book and you'll understand it. And after that, if you need to schedule another appointment with me, go ahead." So I was done with him. That was like the crappiest
Shockingly,
advice.
that was the last time with him.
Yeah, yeah. It was the crappiest advice anybody could ever give you about mental health. You're
Suck it
fine,
up.
nothing's wrong with you. Yeah, suck it up, be stronger. So next therapist I went to, she was really good, diagnosed me with generalized anxiety, taught me some coping skills that made,
Okay.
because now I've got this cardiac issue, I've got a kidney issue, I've got blood pressure that needs to be monitored. So I needed to live, I needed to be getting healthcare.
Okay.
And so basically, she taught me some coping skills, but then suddenly she was no longer available. No explanation. Just when I went to schedule my next appointment, it said she's not available, pick somebody else. So I felt like I was making progress with her. I reached out to her over like 2 to 3 weeks, got zero response. So I had to pick another person. Found
Mm.
this other guy. And in our first session, he said, "There's a heck of a lot more going on here than generalized anxiety. I have some ideas. I want to do some research, and I'll talk to you again when we meet next week." So next week, he said to me, "I want to ask you some questions and just play along with me, even though they might not make any sense." So he
Okay.
asked me a series of questions. One of them, and I won't go through all of them, was, "What day of the week do you like to go grocery shopping, and where do you park?" And I said, "Monday or Tuesday morning, as early as possible. I definitely don't park near the entrance. I park pretty far away. And as long as I can get a spot next to one of those cart corrals where you put your cart back, I do that so I can get in, get out, get my groceries in the car, and leave as fast as possible." So then he revealed to me, he goes, "I work with a lot of veterans with PTSD, and you've answered all these questions exactly like veterans with PTSD." And he goes, "I think you have something that most people don't know about called medical PTSD." And he said, this very astute guy, he said, "Now, I think you're the kind of person who's not going to believe what I say unless you come to your own conclusion." So he said,
You seem like that guy, Chuck.
yeah, yeah. So he said, "Here's a link to an article. I want you to read it and then discuss it with me the next time we get together." So the article was about medical PTSD. I read it and I just went, "Holy cow, this explains it." And with my second therapist, she got really close to my
Yeah.
diagnosis. And um, I created an Excel file called My Traumatic Events. And at that point, I'm now up to like 38 or 39 things, but I started in chronological order, putting things happen to me starting from childhood that I consider traumatic, with either dental care, medical care, injuries that needed medical care, and things like that. And I told her I labeled this as my traumatic events, but she never connected it to PTSD. So he did,
Oh.
and he's my therapist now. More than a year later, he's just been amazing to work with. But in unpacking all of this, it really helped me to put a lot of things in context. It's helped me understand why I behave certain ways. Like one of my PTSD And by the way, there's something in mental health where, as a kid, my parents always used to say to me, and a lot of parents of my generation probably said this, what's wrong with you? Right? And so that's the way people often tend to think about mental health. What's wrong with you? The real question is what happened to you? Because avoiding healthcare environments where I was injured from childhood and where I was further traumatized as an adult, that's a survival behavior, right? I'm
Yes. Yeah.
avoiding the
Yeah.
place where I was hurt.
Yeah.
Hypervigilance is another PTSD trait. And I find this funny now, and it's not funny when you're going through it, but every time I was in the grocery store, and why I liked going so early when there were a few people in the store, is every time I would turn a corner in the store, or if there was somebody in that aisle, I was hyper vigilant, and the thought went through my head: if they attacked me, could I take them? Right? And I'm not a brawler. I mean, the last time I was in a physical fight was, when somebody attacked me in college, and I had to defend myself, at 19 years old. But that was the thought that went through my head. And if it was a little old lady, I was like, okay, I'm fine
I
in this.
got her. I
With
got her.
this person who looked like they could be an adversary, it really jacked up my adrenaline because of that hyper.
Whoa.
So, there are a lot of traits that I suddenly understood with PTSD. So, Ken,
Interesting.
that's not all the story with mental health
Yeah.
for me, because during my first meeting with my very astute therapist, he said to me, "Have you ever been tested for being on the autism spectrum?" And I was like, "No." He said, "Have you ever done any like tests on your own?" And I said, "I did a couple of quizzes, some years ago that I found online. And, the results were kind of like, probably not, maybe, but probably not." And he said,
But why? But yeah, so let me ask you, Chuck, why did you take the test? Why would you self-test? Because I think for listeners, anybody listening to this show later,
well, I
why,
since
what would cause you
I
to?
I since have learned that anybody who self-tests is probably autistic.
Yeah.
Because I think it was because, um, I've always felt like I see the world differently than other people. I think my brain is different than most other people. And I've always kind of felt that way. And I tend to be a pretty introspective person, which is often another autistic trait. But, so I guess I stumbled upon these things
Okay.
somewhere. And that was years before. So as a coach, I've had several clients who are autistic and have shared that with me, and others who I've suspected are autistic. But I was able to work with them and understand them and provide support. So I considered myself an ally, and I went from, if you remember the show Minions, I went from ally to one of us.
Yeah.
Right, is
Yeah.
the way I look at it. The Minions going, one of us, one of us.
Okay. Sorry.
But
So back to the doctor. Yeah. How did he got
yeah,
you? So he
so
sniffed it out.
yeah, in our very first meeting. So,
Huh.
I said, "Look, I'm really interested in this medical stuff. I'm not really interested in talking about that other stuff." And he was like, "Okay, fine." Through social media, and I'll give a shout out to her. I've become friends with an amazing person, Alex Pearson, who has been she got her autism diagnosis in her mid-20s, and she shared a lot. Believe it or not, I found her on TikTok at first, doing TikTok videos about adults diagnosed with autism. And then I connected with her on LinkedIn, and she recommended a website where you could go and do autism self tests with interpretations by a psychologist, how to understand your scores and
Okay.
whether that means you're more likely or less likely to be
Hmm.
autistic. It does not qualify as a professional diagnosis, and we could go down a rabbit
Yeah.
hole of self-diagnosed versus professional diagnosed autism. But when first time I met with Alex, before I was meeting with Alex for the first time, I went ahead and I did these tests. I wanted to be able to refer autistic clients to her because
Okay.
she's got a master's in psychology, and
Oh,
as
this
I
is
like to say,
great.
understands
So
autism.
you took the you took the test so you could refer other people to the test.
Yes, because I wanted to experience it, right? And
But then you
so
found out something.
yes, I found out I was over threshold, meaning that I was likely to be autistic on pretty much all the tests. So when Alex and I finally had our first Zoom call, I shared with her, and Alex was like clapping her hands and bouncing up and down in her seat, saying, I knew it, I knew it. As soon as we started talking, I knew that you're autistic too. So I took that back to my therapist the next week, and I said to him, I said, "Hey, I want to talk to you. When we first met, you brought up autism." He said, "Yes." I said, "Well, I just did this series of tests." Explained to him. He goes, "What tests?" I told him the tests. "What are your scores?" I told him the scores, and he said, "Congratulations, you're unequivocally autistic." And I said, "Well, do I need to do more testing?" He goes, "No, all
Yeah.
those tests are valid. I've known it since the first time we talked." I said, "Well, why didn't you bring it up again?" He goes, "Because you said you wanted to focus on the medical
Yeah.
stuff, and that's what we've been doing." We got back around to it. So he's been a wonderful guide, and meeting many other adults diagnosed with autism has really been wonderful. We help each other and help understand each other. There's a Discord channel that I haven't been as active on in recent months for adults diagnosed with autism. And one of the things that autistic people often do is called stimming. So kind of the stereotype, and you'll see this more in children because children don't know to mask or hide their stimming as much. The classic thing is waving your arms or flapping your arms, right? Is an autistic, can be an autistic stimming trait. I had a number of those when I was a child, never that, but I had a lot of annoying things that other people kind of socialized out of me. But those behaviors help kind of soothe those of us who use them and help us calm down. One of my really bad ones, which I went all through college, and it wasn't until I got in my first job that I was sharing an office with a woman, and she was like, "You've got to stop that. You're driving me crazy." When I was thinking deep in thought, I would sit with a pen and go constantly. Like I could do that for like 10 minutes, not even hearing it, but just the clicking was soothing to me. Bouncing my leg, shaking my foot, all kinds of things. People always would say, "Can't you sit still?" And I would say, "No, I can't sit still." So there's so much unpacking that I've had to do with learning as an adult that I'm autistic.
I'd love to make sure we get these some of the notes. So the show will go live and this will be pretty packed. But we're gonna put this on the Apple, well, up on Apple and Spotify. And I want to make sure we get the notes. Maybe later you can send me some of the links that you've got. Any
Yeah,
resources.
absolutely. Absolutely. So Ken,
So critical.
one of the things after I made all this progress with my therapist, he said to me, "Look, you're a coach. You've really been making a lot of progress, on your PTSD with autism. Have you given any thought to how you can help other
Yes.
people?" And I
Yes.
said, "Yeah." I said, "In fact, I'm doing some work to incorporate more of this into my coaching." And he goes, "Well, how about volunteering to help other people with their mental health?"
Great.
So I said, "Well, I don't have any training to do that, so I'm not really comfortable doing that." And he goes, "Just jump in, you'll be fine." I said,
Yes.
"No, I won't."
That's
So
not you. That's
I
not
just
Chuck.
no. So I discovered training. I didn't know this existed, and it exists in most states in the United States. It's called a certified peer specialist for mental health. And
Oh,
in Georgia, where I live, it involves about 2 weeks of training, where you learn about how to be a peer to support other people going through mental health recovery.
hmm.
So they teach, various skills and approaches and things for you to do. And then after you finish the training, you have to sit for a written and an oral exam. And then once
Oh,
you pass, you're a certified peer specialist for mental health. You can work full time doing that if you wish. And basically, a certified peer specialist is, I love this term that I learned from another highly experienced certified peer specialist. You are a dealer of hope, because basically what you're saying to other people, you're not a therapist, you're not a social worker. You're saying, I'm a person just like you. I've had some
Yeah.
mental health challenges. I am navigating my way through this. I'm going to manage this for the rest of my life. But, like there was an old book in the 70s, I'm okay, you're okay. And, I would paraphrase it to, I'm going to be okay and you're going to be okay too. So that's the first thing that a certified peer specialist does. The other thing is just to demonstrate compassion, right? So, I had people, as I couldn't tolerate healthcare, I had various people say to me, oh, you're a baby. Oh, men are chicken. They don't like doctors. If you had to go through what a woman did, with childbirth, you'd probably die. And I would like, yeah, I would rather die
Yeah, you would.
than
Yeah, for
go
you, you'd rather die.
close, right? I came close. I managed to beat it. And then finally, a peer specialist, certified peer specialist, can help people develop different skills, goal setting, how to like take one step
Mm,
ahead, how to advocate for yourself. A lot of times people who are experiencing mental health challenges feel weak and unsure. And we've got these experts with degrees who kind of say, okay, this is what you need to do. This is what you have, or this is the condition, you need to do this. Well, the reality is each one of us is an expert in our own lives and in our own
yeah.
bodies, our own minds, right? So when we're talking to a therapist, there are two experts in the room. They're experts by their education and experience. We're experts by living in our own bodies,
Yeah.
our own minds. And so teaching people self-advocacy is a huge skill that comes along with being a certified peer specialist.
It's you've got an amazing journey, and it seems like you're kind of at the beginning of like your journey up to that point, finding out, discovering that you had autism, and kind of sorting out that PTSD part, and all of a sudden now you're on this. You've got this whole other life ahead of you.
Yeah, I mean, it really. Thank you for recognizing that, because it really is a demarcation point.
Yeah, I
And
can feel it. I can feel it.
so and my life has completely changed. I think I'm a better coach. I'm a better consultant.
For sure.
Um, and that's what I do with most of my time. I work part time, just getting started with a community mental health organization as a certified peer specialist. But I'm talking with a lot of people informally, and there's kind of a theme to to what I'm trying to help people understand.
Mm,
And it is this, and I really appreciate you giving me the opportunity to share this, is that every one of us is likely experience some form of mental health crisis during our life, or some mental health
absolutely.
challenge. It might be very minor and it might pass quickly. It might be severe. It could be intense depression. Someone might need hospitalization
Yep.
or medication, or really strong intervention. There's a lot of stuff people go through, but the takeaway for me is that we can be living with a mental health challenge and not even really be aware of how much it's affecting us, affecting
Mm,
our physical health, our
agree.
mental health, affecting our potential,
And the
and
people
really,
around us, right?
yeah, it can be holding us back tremendously.
Yeah.
And so I was just in a program yesterday where I was a participant, and there was a panel of mental health experts, who were being they gave a brief presentation, then asked questions. One person in the audience asked, how do we know if somebody's having a mental health crisis, and what should we do about it? And so they literally answered the question. My answer would have been a little different.
Okay.
We all need to be aware of our mental health all the time, and be aware of the mental health of those around us. It's kind
Yes.
of a cliche, but it's true. The whole thing, no one knows what anyone else is going through.
It's
And
it's
so the kinder we can be to people, the more curious we can be, and asking questions of people versus judging
Mm.
them, and the way we can try to be of service and help people rather than, being demanding or forceful with them, will all be much better if we can just look at that and realize that anybody could be going through anything at any given moment. And maybe they're not being their best selves, but maybe we can be our better selves by helping them.
I That's one thing we shared before I started, just how surprised I am that how everybody I've met and shared their stories, some at some point, them or somebody really close to them, real mental health crisis, and how they and it's not your story is not dissimilar, kind of kind of finding somehow navigating through and finding it out, and then what you do with the discovery of it and that information and how you go forward. This is yours is a great story, and I like what you're doing with it. I mean, I love what you're doing with it, which is embracing it, not kind of saying, "Oh, that's not me. I'm not autistic." It's like, okay, now what do we do? What do I do with that information? And now the peer coaching. Great. That's an amazing step.
Yeah, well, thank you, Ken. You bring up a really good point. So I have been, accused is probably a strong word, but I've been called out
Hmm.
for, oh, you're being too positive about your autism. You're being too positive about PTSD. Oh no, there can be bad days at any moment. So something I learned from my therapist, he suggested that, because he's a veteran. He's like, there are a lot of veteran groups that would really appreciate, your support. And I said to him, I said, look, I haven't been through anything compared to what,
Yeah,
veterans have
yeah.
been through. And he was like, if you sit in a room full of veterans with PTSD, everyone will think that everyone else has had it worse than they have. And that's one of the things, right? That, so people can get into it. I actually learned this before I knew I had PTSD, but people often think like, oh, I'm not as bad off as so and so is,
Yeah, yeah.
or oh, what they've been through is worse than I've been through.
Yes.
But we all do that. And with autism, I have looked at it and I said, well, maybe I'm not really autistic. I've talked to other
Yeah.
autistic people who have said, um, I really don't think I'm autistic, but that's what the tests say. There's one person who is a friend of mine who has, who, as soon as I got my diagnosis, I started thinking about people I know who I think are likely to be autistic. She was the first person who popped into my mind. We've had multiple conversations, and she is like, "No, I'm not autistic. I'm just introverted and extremely intelligent." And I'm like, "Okay, I can't diagnose anybody else.
Yeah.
I can't, move anybody else. But there are moments of doubt,
Hmm.
right? There are
I'm
moments
sure.
when, like, oh, this doesn't seem real. And then I go back and I process my life and I'm like, yeah, it is real.
What an interesting journey. Um, we're at a good spot to we're a good spot to kind of say what else you want to leave the audience with. I mean, this has been. I mean, before I kind of throw it back to you, one is I'm interested to take the test.
Mhm.
It just sounds like me in so many ways. Even the medical trauma, even
Yeah,
like I didn't have any manifestations, but I do like to park my car far away in the back. Prefer a good exit.
yeah,
I'm pretty vigilant as
yeah,
well. But I don't have the feelings of fear turning the corner. But I think I'm sure there's people that it would resonate with.
yeah.
So for
Well,
sure, I want to take that test.
yeah. Well, so first with PTSD, um, there are a lot of things that we as lay people don't realize, can be linked to PTSD.
Hmm.
So after my therapist and I were working and agreed upon the medical PTSD diagnosis, I started to think about some other things. And, I casually mentioned that I was in what could have been a horrific car crash. My car was destroyed on a highway by a truck driver who fell asleep and just like left his lane and smashed into the side of my car, spun my car around, T-boned me, and pushed me down the highway. And there was literally zero doubt. I just, very matter of fact, my thought was, okay, so this is how I die, right? I
While it's
was just
happening,
convinced,
yeah.
yeah, while it was happening. And, they say that time slows down. Time did slow down. I saw my driver's side window break in slow motion. Um, and then, the glass kind of exploded.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
closed my eye. I had cuts on the side, like superficial cuts on the side of my forehead from the glass hitting me, but I closed my eyes in because everything was in such slow motion. But I walked away from that with scratches, and my therapist said, okay, that one event could give you a lifetime of PTSD.
Yes.
So it's really good to kind of learn about PTSD and reflect on it. There's also something that a lot of us, there's a study called ACEs, which is childhood traumatic experiences. And so you can Google, ACEs quiz. If you put ACEs quiz in NPR, it gives you an article and a link to the quiz.
Mm.
And you can look back on your childhood. And so part of me being an autistic child was I interpreted different events differently. And I had, a lot of what was considered bad behavior because I was overstimulated. And I got injured as a child because I didn't pay attention, or I didn't believe, like, my father had a car repair business and um, he welded a big piece of steel. I was like 4 years old, maybe 3 years old. I was young. And he walked away and said, don't touch that. Well, the first thing I did was I went over and touched it. And, I had, serious burns, not third-degree burns, but serious burns on my hand. Had to go to the hospital. It was painful. Back then they did what they don't do now. They slathered my hand in some type of burn ointment
Yeah.
and bandaged everything up. Burns probably got worse and more
Yeah.
painful.
Yeah.
But anyway, so I had a lot of experiences as a child that PTSD from child. So that's one of the things. Like, we may not even be aware that experiences were traumatic because we adapted and moved on, but
Yep.
they don't go away. They're buried and they harm us. So that's one thing. And I can share with you afterwards the link to an article on medical PTSD. On autism, there's a website called embrace-autism.com.
Okay.
And there are a series of free tests on embrace-autism.com that you can do, and it will give you some insights. Now, this does not replace getting a professional diagnosis if you want to do that, but it will give you good insights. And
Yes.
there are some people who do not want a professional diagnosis in their medical records. They may be concerned for employment or
Understood. Right.
discrimination. There may be visa issues in some countries, or residency issues in some countries, where they don't want an autistic person moving in, even
Yeah.
though
Yeah.
the person may be brilliant. They may have backwards thinking that, like, oh, this person's going to be a drain on our healthcare
Yeah.
system.
Sure.
We're going to have to support them because it's considered a disability, right? Being autistic is considered a disability. The DSM-5 psychiatric manual or psychological manual considers autism to be autism spectrum disorder, meaning that there's something wrong with you.
A disorder.
It is a disorder. Yes. And, Ken, a funny story is when I told my dental hygienist, when, any update in your medical records, I said, yes, I'm on the autism spectrum. And she said, oh my gosh, you're very high functioning. And the thought that went through my head was, yes, I've had my own business since 2007.
Yeah.
after a successful corporate career. I've got an Ivy League master's degree. I've got 3 wonderful children. I own my house. My wife and I have been married for over 30 years. Yeah, I'm pretty high functioning. I didn't say any of this, but I'm thinking, how high functioning are you? Right? Should we compare functioning levels?
Oh
So,
God, that's a
yeah,
weird,
there's
uh,
a lot of stigma, a lot of misunderstandings around autism. 2 websites that are not online yet, but if anybody wants to connect with me on LinkedIn, I'm
okay.
happy to talk to people one-on-one about autism or PTSD. I'm easily findable on LinkedIn, Chuck Hall. And my email is chuck@chuckemail.com. I'm happy to
Hmm.
put that out there. And 2 websites that are coming. One is on medical PTSD. I'm part of a working group putting information out to help people understand medical PTSD. And then I'm also spinning up a website called Autistics Among Us that highlights people like me who are autistic but living in the world, having great lives. And most people, have stereotypes about autistic people, and I'm not the stereotype.
Yeah. Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, Chuck, great. I mean, a great conversation and much needed. And I think, part of what we're trying to do with this show is to remove some of the stigmatism. Um, one of the biggest issues, as you may know, for people seeking out mental health help, as you kind of alluded to, is the stigmatism that gets attached to it. And I even forgot about the fact that it's a record and it's a illness, and the other parts about the international part. I mean, those are all parts I've kind of forgotten about. So it is. I mean, the stigma is not just amongst your own self. Like you said, people don't even want to have their own recognition, stigmatizing themselves as somebody they
Mhm,
wouldn't want to be labeled as, but
mhm.
also how that impacts, the worldview of you.
Yeah.
And that's, sitting there with a hygienist looking at you and making a judgment on you as being a human and how you're doing in
Mhm.
life. Kind of bananas. Um, so that's kind of, I'm really appreciative of you being so open and sharing. This is a long way to what we're trying to do. And I think kind of getting these resources together in one place is fantastic. Again,
Yeah.
thanks, Chuck, so much for sharing. I really appreciate it. And
Yeah.
thanks
Well,
to everybody that's watched.
thank you for the opportunity, Ken. And again, nobody needs to hide. Go ahead.
Yeah.
You Star Trek always said space is the final frontier. It's not. Our own minds are the final frontier.
And the only one that matters. The only one that matters.
Absolutely.
Everything in our own mind, people. Again, Chuck, thanks so
Great.
much. Thanks, everybody. And thanks for the random 1 and 2 watchers that we had on the show. I don't know if you've got that little symbol up on top, but we even got a heart. I mean, might be the first heart we ever got on the show. So I owe that to you, Chuck. Thanks. Your story resonated with somebody. Yeah,
Wonderful.
Nikki.
Thank you, Ken.
Yeah. Okay, let me find a little exit. I'll try to kind of gracefully exit us out. Hang on for a quick minute. Let's have a post chat in the green room.
Okay.
Thanks, everybody.